Nowadays, most people here in the United States would agree that racism is a bad, immoral, and even evil thing that should be buried 6 feet under. This is something that I myself couldn't agree more with. In my mind, racism is all of those things that I just mentioned, and it should be done away with. Yet, for some unfathomable reason, many people in this country, millions even, support affirmative action. The idea that it should be easier or more difficult to get into college or even find a new job based on upon what race you are is racism by definition. Race has absolutely nothing to do with how qualified someone is for a job position, and race also has nothing to do with the better of selecting the better of two students. How would you feel if you or someone you loved or cared about missed out on a job simply because the company that they applied for needed to hit a racial quota? David Sachs and Peter Thiel once wrote that you can't undo racism with more racism. Affirmative action is wrong, and we should be thinking of different ways to help minorities and other peoples in disadvantaged situations rather than screwing over everyone else. There are many reasons that affirmative action is a negative. Someone who might be less qualified for a job, or someone who might have gotten a worse SAT score, might get some kind of opportunity that they wouldn't have gotten simply because of their race. Harvard University, for example, one of the most highly renowned schools in the country, sends letters of recruitment to potential students based on their SAT score, meaning that you have to have at least a certain score to receive one of these letters, which makes sense. What doesn't make sense is that they change the minimum score based upon the race and gender of the individual. For African Americans, Native Americans, and Hispanics, they need to receive a score of at least 1100 on their SAT, to receive a letter. White people need at least a 1310 to receive a letter. And lastly, Asian women would need a 1350 and men a 1380 to receive a letter. It's absolutely mind boggling that Harvard would send one of these recruitment letters to someone with a much lower score than someone else solely based on the fact that their race is different. This would be extremely comparable to people applying for jobs as well. Many companies such as IBM and Intel use and or support affirmative action, saying that they're trying to be diverse, when all that they're really doing is potentially giving jobs to underqualified people. If I were to decide to buy a new computer from either Intel or IBM, I couldn't care less about the race of the person who's helping me purchase said computer. I'd want the person who's going to give me the best help. And affirmative action isn't only racist, but it can put people in positions that they don't quite frankly deserve to be in. There are one of two things that I believe must be done to fix this issue. On one hand, affirmative action could be adjusted so that it's based upon financial needs rather than one's race. For example, schools could provide more financial support to students who may meet the education and grade requirements but are in a poor economic condition. If schools want to make it easier for poor people to attend college regardless of race, then that's fine, and there would be no issue with that. The other option is making affirmative action illegal, not organically, but rather making it illegal to let race play any role in determining whether someone is hired for a job or gets accepted into a school, or any other situation for that matter, where race has no business in being a qualification. In a world without affirmative action, there would actually be less racism than in the one we live in now, despite what many people might think. If some of you find that hard to believe, it's understandable, as affirmative action was created with the intent of helping minorities who have been discriminated against in the past. But the reality is that countering racism with more racism doesn't magically make the world a better place. Neither does it other instances of race make it just make other instances of racism just disappear. But it's still far better than just leaving it there. As I previously mentioned, there wouldn't be any more people getting jobs that they don't deserve, or people getting into schools that they shouldn't get into simply because of race. As an example, the NFL has a rule called the Rooney Rule, which requires teams with open staff positions to give interviews to minorities, which by itself isn't really all too bad as long as they aren't forcing the teams to actually hire anyone that they don't think they should hire. However, recently the NFL has considered giving extra draft picks to these teams that actually hire these minorities, which this hasn't been passed yet, but the fact that they're even considering it is quite crazy. 2020 has been a year of turmoil for pretty much everybody. A global pandemic, political turmoil, and all sorts of other crazy stuff. And I don't want to tell you guys to just go out and do some crazy stuff to get your point across. But if you want to see affirmative action go just as much as I do, then talk about it with people. Make your voice heard. But don't go and burn down buildings and harm others to do that. That sort of violent protest should have no place in this world. I wish you the best of luck and farewell.